Why the best women's soccer team can't beat the worst men's team. A football reality check. Football is a game of skill, intelligence, and strategy. But at its core, it's also a game of physicality, endurance, and intensity. And that's where one of the most awkward debates in sports comes in. Could the best women's soccer team defeat the worst men's professional team? Welcome to The Football Scientist, where we break down football like no one else. If you love in-depth football analysis, controversial takes, and the hard-hitting truths about the game, make sure to subscribe and join the conversation. Today we're diving into a controversial yet undeniable truth. Why even the most dominant women's team in the world struggles to compete with a lower-tier men's team. Before emotions take over, let's break down the science, history, and reality behind this debate. The cold hard truth. Physicality wins matches. It's not a matter of effort, passion, or dedication. Women's football is growing fast, and the Women's World Cup has shattered viewership records. But when it comes to actual head-to-head matchups, the reality isn't as flattering. Let's talk about speed. In the men's game, top players can sprint up to 37 kilometers per hour, while the best in the women's game max out around 32. That difference may seem small, but over the course of 90 minutes, it changes everything, especially in a sport where pace can be the difference between winning and losing. Then there's endurance. Men naturally have larger lung capacity and higher oxygen intake, which allows them to maintain a higher tempo for longer. That's why men's matches tend to be more explosive and physically intense, while women's matches lean towards a more technical and controlled style, and we can't ignore strength. When it comes to tackling, aerial duels, and shooting power, the difference is obvious. The harder shots, the stronger challenges, the ability to hold off defenders, these things make a huge impact in a game where small physical advantages add up over time. But don't take my word for it. Let's look at what actually happened on the pitch. A harsh reality check. The US women's national team versus FC Dallas, U15 boys, 2017. If you ever wanted irrefutable proof of the gap between men's and women's football, look no further than this historical masterpiece of awkwardness. In 2017, the US women's national team, a team that had dominated international women's football, played a scrimmage against an under-15 boys team from FC Dallas. The result? The boys won 5-2. Yes, you heard that right. A group of teenage boys, many of whom wouldn't even make it to professional football, beat the reigning world champions. And before you think this was a fluke, it's happened before. In 2016, the Australian women's national team, known as the Matildas, lost 7-0 to a Newcastle Jets U15 boys team. If elite professional women's teams struggle against teenagers, what happens when they face grown men who are bigger, stronger, and faster? Why, even the worst men's team would still win. Some people might argue that football isn't just about physicality. It's about tactics, technique, and intelligence. And that's true. But when physicality creates an overwhelming gap, no amount of clever passing is going to save you. Think about a lower-tier men's team, maybe a struggling side in the English Championship or the bottom club in a European First Division. Even if they're the worst in their league, their players are still used to high-intensity competition every single week. They play against elite-level athletes, not just tactically gifted players, but physically superior ones. Meanwhile, the best women's team in the world only ever plays against other women, which means they never get exposed to that level of physicality. It's one thing to be a dominant player when everyone on the pitch is built like you. But it's another thing entirely when suddenly the defenders are taller, faster, and stronger than anything you've ever faced before. That's why the best women's teams don't just struggle against professional men's teams, they struggle even against youth squads. What about tactics and skill? One common counter-argument is that women's football is more technical, that they rely less on physicality and more on intelligence. But here's the issue. Tactics only work if you have the time and space to execute them. Against men, the game speeds up too much. Spaces close down too quickly. The passes that might work against another women's team suddenly get intercepted. The runs that normally create openings don't work because the defenders are faster. The shots that find the top corner don't have enough power to beat a stronger goalkeeper. No matter how tactical a women's team is, they simply don't get enough time to execute their strategies before a physically superior opponent shuts them down. The hard truth, it's just science. If football was played in slow motion, maybe tactics could compensate. But in the real world, speed, power, and endurance win games. If you still think otherwise, just look at what has actually happened every time a women's team has played a men's team. There are 0 recorded instances of a top women's team beating even a lower-level professional men's team. None. Not because the women aren't talented, not because they don't work hard, but because biology matters in sports. Final verdict. Can it ever happen? So, can the best women's team ever beat the worst men's team? The honest answer? Number not now, and not in the foreseeable future. Football is a game where physicality is king, and no amount of tactics, teamwork, or passion can completely overcome that. The US women's national team losing to teenage boys wasn't an accident. It was a harsh but undeniable reminder that at the end of the day, biology plays a role in sports. Does that mean women's football isn't exciting or valuable? Of course not. Women's football is growing, improving, and inspiring millions. But in direct competition with men, the gap is still enormous. For now, the idea of a top women's team beating a men's team remains a fantasy rather than a possibility. This has been The Football Scientist, where we break down football like no one else. If you love football debates, deep analysis, and hard-hitting truths, make sure to subscribe so you never miss a video. What's your take? Should men's and women's football even be compared? Let us know in the comments.